Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about the idea of fixing the problem, not the blame. So fix the problem, not the blame. And I'll say that this episode is very closely related to a prior episode titled The Do's and Don'ts of Coaching Conversations. Not exactly the same. I will say this is kind of a supplementary idea that's connected to that and also fits in a broader context of leadership communication in terms of how we address problems within our team, within our organization. One of the things we run into from a leadership communication standpoint is that leaders often feel the responsibility to find the responsible party. So when something goes wrong, it's very tempting to be looking for the person who messed up rather than trying to fix the problem that led to the mess up. And while I will acknowledge that we will eventually run into situations where the person is the problem, they're not qualified, they make poor decisions on a routine basis, they're unethical, they have poor character, they're abusive, they're aggressive, they're far too passive, they don't make decisions fast enough. All of these things could, and some of them probably will happen in your leadership journey. What I'm going to suggest is that those are the exception rather than the rule. It's generally true that when things go wrong, it's a process failure rather than a person failure. And so one of the things we want to do is look for a way to fix the process rather than find the person to blame. This is related to a coaching concept that is fix the process, not the person, or focus on the process, not on the person. And one of the things we have to do to address the idea of fixing the problem, not the blame, is to look at where this tendency on our leadership communication comes from. One of the things that can happen is that as a leader, we can feel highly responsible for what goes wrong in our organizations, even if we didn't personally make the decision that drove an action or failed to drive an action or whatever the specific circumstance is. We can feel personally responsible for what happened in the organization. And if we're not careful, a concept known as self-justification will creep in. And self-justification basically is the idea that we look for ways of justifying or excusing our own actions or decisions so that basically it's not our fault. Well, what that could turn into in the leadership world is I try so hard for it to not be my fault that I start looking for the person that I can make it theirs. And that's where we have to be careful. I'll say that in a criminal case, finding the culpable party, probably an okay thing to do. In the political world, if I look at what happens in the news and I watch politicians on both sides of the aisle discuss things, it's my opinion that pretty much the whole conversation is about who to blame, not about fixing the problem. Now, I'll say that in the business and organizational world, that's rarely the best thing to do. It's usually a process problem rather than a person problem. And so we want to focus on fixing the process first or the problem first and being concerned about the person to blame or the people second. So let's beware of self-justification and look at the ways our communication might reveal that we are pursuing a self-justifying or blame-seeking behavior. Let's say a customer delivery was missed. A blame statement would be, who forgot to do this? Looking for the person who made the mistake. Problem-solving question would be, well, how did we miss this? Or what part of our process failed? Another kind of situation might be a product or service quality issue was off spec or below expectation. A blaming question would be, who did this? Or why did you do this? Or why did they do this? Or why didn't they do this? Whatever the specific situation might be. A problem-solving question would be, what happened in this situation? Or where did our quality checks break down? So the path forward here to get better at fixing the problem rather than fixing the blame, I would say is in two parts. One is to take an I'm responsible. That's what a mentor of mine gave me. I'm responsible. Responsible for what? I'm responsible for everything. I'm responsible for how people interpret my messages. I'm responsible for the messages I send so that I can remain in charge of how to fix the problem. which could be said a different way. So rather than I'm responsible, you might break that into I'm response able, meaning I'm able to respond to this situation. Here's what that means from a leadership perspective or leadership mindset situation. I might not have caused this problem. I can work to fix it. So I'm not looking for the person to blame. I'm looking to fix the problem. Another way to think about it would be, I did not intend for people to hear my communication that way, and they did. What can I do to clarify my point, as opposed to why didn't they hear it right? Another way to say that same thing again would be to say that people heard my message or interpreted my actions in a way other than what I intended, and ultimately that is the message that they received from my words and actions. How can I clean it up or correct it? So I'm trying to keep the focus on what I can do to improve the situation rather than getting frustrated or irritated with the other person or blaming the other person for the miscommunication. That's on the responsible or I'm response able mindset. The second thing you can do is you can change the way you ask questions. And the way you ask questions tends to reveal whether you're focused on fixing the problem or fixing the blame. Big picture idea I'll leave you with today is you want to be very careful of any why or who question. I'm not going to suggest that these are black and white answers to fix the problem, not the blame concern. Because almost everything in leadership has extremes where you can go too far in one direction or the other and all of a sudden you're in the weeds. I'm just going to offer some general guidelines to consider. So as a general rule, I'd be really careful with why and who questions. Why and who questions tend towards blame unless you're incredibly careful with how you say them. For example, who knows what happened is probably an okay statement. So who knows what happened here? So you're finding out who could give you good information. Who did this? Probably not a good question. That's a blaming question. Another way to think of this is, well, why did this happen? Might be okay. Why did you do that or not do that? Is probably not. The first is a problem definition question. The second is a blaming question. Better ways to ask questions would be to really, rather than use why and who, most of the time substitute why and who with what and how. So rather than who knows what happened, which could drift towards a blaming question if you're not really careful with it, you could say, well, what happened here? You could say, who has information about what happened here? Maybe there's a combination. The idea is you're fixing your focus on the process that led to the information delivery to the person, more on the decision the person made. At the end of your investigation, you might find out that the person had perfectly good information and just made a bad decision. Could be true. You just don't want to start there. So what happened here? What led to this decision? What information was available at the time we made this decision? Probably good questions. Another way to say that is, well, how did we get here? How did that happen? How did this information come to you? How does the process work? Those are good questions to ask because they're process or problem definition focused questions. It's more difficult for what and how questions to turn into personal questions. Now, you could mess that up with your tone and body language and those kind of things. And the idea is that if you're keeping your focus on addressing the process we used to get to a particular place or decision, if you're focused on the problem that was created by a decision rather than the person who made the decision, if you're focused on fixing the business problem rather than correcting the person, you're probably tending in the right direction. So the idea for today is fix the problem, not the blame. And I'll say the summary idea to leave you with on how to do this more effectively is that it comes really in two parts. First part is I'm responsible. As a leader, I'm responsible for figuring out the root cause of this problem and figuring out how to fix it. I'm not responsible for the decisions my people make. I don't have to worry about self-justification. I don't have to worry about shifting blame. I need to figure out what caused this problem so we can fix it. The second part of talking like a leader and fixing the problem rather than the blame is to learn how to ask better questions. Remember that what, how, and sometimes even where, like where did this process break down? So what, how, and where are generally better questions rather than who and why focused questions. Who and why drifts towards blame. What, how, and where drifts towards problem definition. If you'll do that, you'll focus on fixing the problem, not the blame. You can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.